This is about defending democracy. This is no longer Democrats versus Republicans. What do you want your kids to believe in? There must be give and take.
This is White Flag with Joe Walsh.
Hey, former Congressman Joe Walsh back with you the week after Thanksgiving. Hope you are doing well. Hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving. Follow me on Twitter at Walsh Freedom. I'm excited for this conversation because it pertains to a topic that I'm obsessed with, but I just don't know enough about. And so I've brought on an expert in this area who I probably disagree with on much of it, but maybe not. We'll find out. Excited. Adam Kovacevich is the CEO and founder of the Chamber of Progress, a liberal tech industry think tank. Interesting stuff they put out, by the way, and everybody should follow them on Twitter at Progress Chamber, at Progress Chamber. You ought to follow their CEO, Adam, as well, at Adam, Kovac. Adam, thank you, my friend. I know you're busy. I know there's a lot going on, and I appreciate you taking some time.
Oh, it's great to be here.
You and I were talking a moment ago before we started our conversation. A couple things to kind of jumpstart, and I thought I really wanted to pick your expertise because this is an issue I think my audience has a lot of interest in. I'm obsessed with it. This issue of content moderation on social media platforms. I don't know enough about it. I wish I were more knowledgeable. The other thing I'll tell you, Adam, is generally I'm pretty libertarian in my politics. I'm especially libertarian when it comes to speech. So I'm just so intrigued by what I acknowledge is a problem, how we do moderate content, how we do balance online safety with free speech. So start big picture with me, that as kind of the intro. When it comes to the issue, Adam, of content moderation, tell me where you fall on leave it all alone or damn it, we got to have a good heavy hand to make sure we're moderating what's going on. Tell me where you are and let's begin to get into that.
I think where I am is that there is and there ought to be a range of approaches to content moderation depending on the service, and that the government shouldn't dictate that a particular platform has to moderate in a certain way, and should it tie the hands of a platform that wants to moderate more. So for example, just in a crude way, to think of a spectrum. And maybe, on one end of the spectrum might be a 4chan or a Parler, right, that allows pretty much everything and frankly doesn't end up with a very robust business because a lot of people don't want to advertise on that. But if you want to pop off and say just about anything you want to, you can do that, right? On the other end of the spectrum, I would put a service like Instagram. Instagram has 1 billion users, right? And I think one of the reasons why Instagram has 1 billion users is because it's made itself let's call it a pleasant place to be. People might disagree with that.
Yeah.
But it's also made itself a very advertiser-friendly place to be. It engages in much more content moderation.
Yeah.
It disallows certain things. We have a realm where we allow both of those to flourish. And I worry about anything that
are you good with that?
Instagram to look more like Parler.
Am
I good with that? Yeah.
So you're good kind of with like what you just spelled out to me is interesting. It kind of sounds like the market at work have all the different various groups out there doing their thing. Is that kind of the way it should be, and let the market decide?
Absolutely. But the problem we have is in the last 2 years, you've seen some, particularly the governors of Florida and Texas, pass laws that essentially prohibit Instagram from moderating and moderating content and making itself, and essentially tying its hands. If that law was passed, it's up for the Supreme Court review. If that law remain in effect, it would make Instagram look more like Parler. And my point is, look, should have room for both Parler and Instagram, but don't tie Instagram's hands. If it wants to have a moderated experience that a lot of its users want, let them do that.
Describe, Adam. I'm fairly familiar with both the Texas and Florida law, but describe for my audience. Pick one of them and describe what it is and kind of what's at play.
They're similar
Okay.
in that they were passed by Governor DeSantis and Texas government, and what they essentially say is a platform should not be allowed to moderate content or discriminate on the basis of viewpoint. Now, on the surface level, that seems really attractive, right? Okay, yeah, sure, I like that, but a viewpoint is basically anything is a viewpoint,
Yeah.
right? Holocaust denial is a viewpoint, right? Incitement to violence is a viewpoint, and so the way that these laws were written essentially prohibit content moderation. I mean, that's my read of them, because anything is viewpoint oriented, and these laws were very quickly challenged by two of our kind of companion technology trade associations, NetChoice and CCIA, and they've now all been challenged up to the Supreme Court, and this will be one of the marquee cases before the Supreme Court in the first half of the next year, and it really will go to the real heart of that question is, does a platform like Facebook or YouTube have its own First Amendment rights to moderate content absent restrictions on the government? And I think a lot of people get confused. A lot of people don't know what the First Amendment is. They think it's my right to say anything. No, it's not your right to say anything. It prohibits the government's restriction on speech. And so in this case, the governments of Texas and Florida are saying Facebook cannot moderate content in the way it wants to. It's a direct limitation on Facebook speech.
And Adam, again, as a former lifelong Republican, I find both what the Texas and Florida governors did real problematic, and I mean, just politically, it seems like Republicans are much more into using the hand of government to kind of restrict or tell some of these social media companies what they can and cannot do.
Well, I'll be honest, and I'm a Democrat. I'll give some criticism to my own side here, because I think that you also see at the same time you see these Republican governors trying to ban any content moderation.
Yeah.
You see a lot of pressure on the part of some Democratic policymakers to press the platforms to moderate content in certain ways. Some people call this jawboning, sort of using your political power to try to persuade a private company, a private actor to allow or disallow certain types of speech. Now, I think both sides engage in jawboning, to be honest. There was a story, for example, about when Kevin McCarthy was running for Speaker. Marjorie Taylor Greene enlisted his office's help in pushing back on Twitter to be reinstated. That's jawboning, right? Like that's it just is, right? And so I just so whether it's a pressure to remove something or it's a pressure to leave something up or reinstate it, it's all political pressure. And I think there's a lot of political pressure on these platforms to moderate content in a certain way.
So am I just unbelievably simplistic, Adam, when I say these are private companies, government stay out, they should moderate themselves. They should be in charge of the rules of engagement on their platforms?
I believe that is the point that will end up carrying the day under the law, in my opinion. I completely agree with that. Now, that's not satisfying to policymakers.
So true. So true.
And so I don't think that fundamental legal truth is going to stop politicians from what some people call working the refs, right? Which is sort of
that's a great way to put it.
Pressuring Facebook. Yeah, pressuring, because the reality is working the refs often works. It often succeeds in getting a platform to moderate content the way a policymaker wants.
Adam, is there, and it's so good to talk to you, by the way, and everybody listening to us, recommend, Adam's the CEO and founder of Chamber of Progress, a great tech industry think tank. Follow them on Twitter @ProgressChamber. Adam, is there anything to this notion that these private companies, these social media companies, kinda, sorta don't want to deal with the issue of content moderation. They'd like this responsibility taken off their hands. So quietly, government, do something. You regulate us. Is there any of that?
I think it's hard. I mean, so first of all, I worked in Google for a dozen years,
Yeah.
and I think that the reality is most of these speech platforms, user-generated content, social media platforms, they all started, and I believe today their default is to allow most speech. I really believe
Good.
that now, and I also think that ordinary, let's say conservative speech, lower taxes, less
Yeah.
government, that's fine. I don't think that any of that's getting censored. The Trump era just brought these historic COVID, I think brought these kind of like historic challenges
Yes.
to speech norms. And I just think put them in a bunch of these positions, which frankly, and I think you've even seen like in hindsight, some of the companies expressing regret about how they handled a certain piece of content in the moment, right?
Yeah.
It maybe felt like the right decision in the moment, but didn't feel that way. And what I find just interesting about this is that, I work in Washington. I've been in the sort of the Washington world for a long time, and a lot of companies have offices here to lobby, the government. Well, now these companies end up getting lobbied by policymakers as much as they lobby.
That's fascinating.
They almost
Explain
have
that.
to-
Explain
They almost
that.
have to set up. Well, they almost have had to set up these like teams to deal with these requests from politicians that are not legal requests. They're not saying politicians aren't saying this is illegal, take it down. The illegal stuff gets taken down. It's the lawful but awful type of content, right? Or what somebody views as awful, right? And that's where they get the pressure. And so I think it's not quite enough to say, oh, well, we'll just follow the First Amendment, because there's a lot of icky stuff that's allowed under the First Amendment.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, incitement to violence,
Hate
things
speech.
like that, terrorist speech, hate speech. It's all allowed under the First Amendment. And you also face this real pressure from advertisers. And again, if you want to be a successful business in the social media space, there are some who do a subscription model. You have, but if advertising is your bread and butter, then many large brand advertisers want what they call brand safety, which is this assurance that their ads are not going to run next to, incendiary kind of material. And so that is a real factor as well.
Okay, then in my dream world, free speech should blossom on the internet, and social media companies should be in charge of moderating themselves. The government should stay out. Adam, what do you do about one practical issue of just outright untruths and disinformation? You talked about the Trump era. I mean, again, I'm a former politician. Politicians hedge, fudge, and lie, but we've never, ever seen something like a Donald Trump, ever. So what do you do when it comes to basic untruths that are spread on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter?
I think this is one of the massive, never-ending challenges of social media, of online platforms. This used to be easier when, frankly, we had less diverse media, when we had, more of a mainstream media, which arguably didn't reflect the views of everyone, and I understand that critique as well. But where, what was seen as sort of authoritative information, there was less disagreement about that. And now there's so many topics in public life that are the source of just disagreement over the facts. Is social media the problem there, or are the social media content moderation wars a reflection of the broader fight we have, politically based fight we have over facts? What's really happening in Gaza? What's really happening with COVID vaccines? What really happened with the 2020 election?
Yeah.
And and I think you see, honestly, what you've seen is platforms experiment. So you've seen Twitter, for example, do community notes, right, as their version of this. And I think that's the idea of sort of matching potentially untrue speech with sort of more of a crowd-sourced Wikipedia model is a really interesting model. Wikipedia, it has a really interesting model in general because it ends up, with this whole hierarchy of editors and its own rules.
Yeah.
And, and if you look at the internal system within Wikipedia, like a lot of this is sort of the human moderator, rules-based system. And I know that Facebook and Google and these companies don't really want to set up truth commissions.
Yeah.
They really
Yeah.
don't want to do
God,
that,
no.
but they just find themselves in this really perpetually difficult position.
Well, and it goes to Section 230. It goes to this notion correctly that these are platforms. They're not publishers. Facebook is a platform, so some knucklehead can go on the platform and regurgitate an article that's total bullshit that they saw somewhere, put it up there on Facebook. But Facebook can't be sued because of that, and the user who put up that article cannot be sued. I think Section 230 is an absolute must and a necessity. Do you worry that either both parties, it seems like that there's been a recent attack, a continued attack on Section 230?
I think a lot of people don't know what Section 230
Yeah.
really does, but it essentially ensures that these user-generated content platforms can exist, and by absolving them of liability. But it also says that if you engage in content moderation by looking for incendiary material, that doesn't hold you responsible for everything you might find, right? There's a sort of, and so that's the important part of it too. It creates room for content moderation. I think if we didn't have Section 230, you would see all these platforms basically having to choose between becoming either a wasteland where they would allow everything because they just look, if we look, we bear legal liability, so we're just not going to look, or like Disneyland, if they're held liable for everything, then it becomes this very highly sanitized environment where nothing, you post a tweet and then 20 minutes later somebody, gets posted because somebody employee at Twitter has looked at it. I don't think we want that either. I don't think many people appreciate that like Section 230 is really like kind of core to the dynamism of the internet. And what people are usually saying, politicians, when they're criticizing Section 230, they're usually criticizing the content moderation decisions that a platform has, right? Which is fair game. Like you can argue, okay, Parler doesn't have enough rules or Instagram has too many. That's fair game. But that's usually what's happening.
And I like the basic difference, like, Sean Hannity can go on TV tonight and just out and out lie. Either side can do this. How do we hold Sean Hannity responsible or Fox News responsible? But the whole notion, Adam, of somebody can lie on the platform of Twitter or Facebook, but that's a whole different concept, correct?
We can still, obviously Fox News was held responsible because
Thank
they
God.
had a massive settlement.
But it
right?
takes a lot. It takes a lot.
It does, but I think there's a difference between, if you go on to Twitter, Joe, go on to Twitter and you defame me, I can still sue you, right? This is what I think people don't realize.
If
I
I directly defame you.
Yeah, you can sue. Like you defame me. Sorry, I can still sue you for defamation, and arguably, the ability to sue you for defamation, if you are truly defaming me, is a better check on the behavior than me suing Twitter, because you're the defamer, right?
Yeah.
You're the person who I don't want to keep doing it, and if all I do is sue Twitter, then you're just going to keep doing it.
It's interesting, Adam, and maybe this is a nuance without a difference. If I went on Twitter and posted a tweet directly defaming you, is that the same thing as if I went on Twitter and posted an article that defames you? Like if I post other information?
Probably not. I'm not an expert in defamation law. My guess is no.
Okay.
But certainly you going on Twitter to defame me, a private citizen, saying I didn't pay my taxes or cheated on my spouse.
So any user, Adam,
I could see
any user on one of these social media platforms, they can, Section 230 doesn't touch them. Like they can directly be held responsible for shit they post.
Absolutely. And look, if you want a sort of a healthier internet dialogue, you should want that, right? You should actually want the ability to. It's sort of in this old-fashioned notion. I'm a Democrat, but I like the old-fashioned notion of sort of personal responsibility and accountability, which is a little bit outmoded in today's politics, but I think is a real thing that actually that's what checks your behavior.
What speech do you worry about then? Again, in my world, I'm one extreme. If I owned one of these platforms, I'd be uber liberal in the speech I allowed. Are there particular areas of speech, Adam, that you are really concerned about as we continue to march forward?
Um, I think we have the benefit of being well-educated information consumers and skeptical information consumers. And, I'd like to think that I am as skeptical of what the New York Times writes as what I see in some random tweet.
Yeah.
Right. That I should be skeptical of all of that. But, of course, that's a privilege. That is a privilege to be, that sort of level of information consumer. Most people aren't that. But I don't know. I mean, what's the solution to the kind of less informed consumer that's not worse than the, disease?
I can't think of one.
Truth commissions. I mean, we don't have poll. We don't require to take a test to be a voter in this country, right? So I don't know. I also think there's a little bit of a dynamic, and I hate to be so resigned about this, but if you really are seeking out 2020 election denial content, you're gonna find it. I'm sorry, just you're not gonna not find it. So I think there's always gonna be a place to find that if you're really looking for it.
So when it comes to that, Adam, and I'm testing you and me, again, here we come. We're coming into 2024, and I think 2024 could be even worse when it comes to disinformation than 2020. And Trump's already out there, saying the election's going to be stolen again. So you own and run Facebook or one of these platforms. You know this is coming. How do you deal with that? Or do you?
Yeah, I think that through more experimentation, I hate to say it, but I think they certainly all the companies have put a lot of resources towards election integrity and trying to set rules. Just as an example, in the last couple months, you've seen Google, Facebook, I think Microsoft, all institute rules saying they are not going to allow political ads on their platforms that have been involved any AI manipulation, any kind of deep fakes, right? And it's interesting because there's actually bills that have passed the state level, and there's bills proposed in Congress that would ban this as well, that arguably might even run into a First Amendment problem because there's not a First Amendment, you're allowed to lie. But they've decided as the platforms, look, we're going to set that rule for ourselves, for the rules we accept. And that's a fine rule. Right.
Yeah. And
so I think interventions like that, where you sort of say, okay, well, this is an intervention that makes sense. That I think you'll see more of that.
Could one of these platforms, private company, I believe they can do what they want. Could Facebook or Twitter say we are not allowing hate speech?
Most of them already do, to be perfectly honest.
Okay.
Most of them already have a policy against speech. I think hate speech, all of them do. Now, of course, what constitutes hate speech,
right,
and they have definitions. There's always going to be cases that people disagree about, where one of the platforms removes something and says this, we consider this to be hate speech, and then people disagree. But the point is, they are private. But they can allow that or disallow it.
And the point is, though, you and I would concur that it's up to them to determine what they.
Oh yeah.
What Adam, educate me. What tools do these major platforms have to monitor this stuff? How do they do it? Naively, I think there's some huge warehouse where you've got 1,000 people who are just, it's not just human, correct?
Right. So I think they use a variety of tools. So one is, in most of these platforms, there's some kind of ability for other users to flag a post for review, another user's flag for review, and of course that could be abused. But that sort of first tool is often the beginning of a review process, and then all of these companies want to employ as much technology, artificial intelligence, automation as possible in making those decisions, because otherwise the level of human review, human labor involved would just be, unthinkable. And then that gets to, and then beyond that is the step of human review. And what most of the companies do is they work with third-party vendors that are basically hiring people to be content moderators. And depending on how the company sets that up, they might only be reviewing, for example, maybe a contested case, right, where there was a flag an automated tool made a decision, maybe the original poster appealed, and maybe then it goes to a human review. So that can be a way for sort of narrowing the funnel of decisions that receive human review. It's very difficult. First of all, it's very difficult work because these content moderators, as you might imagine, end up seeing a lot of, sometimes traumatic content, right? And so
it can have an impact, I would think, on them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's a space where, frankly, there's a lot of turnover. There's a lot of mental health resources provided. It's an industry challenge about how to do this in sort of a safe and sustainable way.
It's interesting to me, Adam, the politics of this issue of content moderation. My former buddies on the right have always complained, and I did a little bit as well, that these social media companies suppressed their speech. There was a left of center bias. And I always thought the left just generally believed in a more activist role for government on these companies. Address both of those. And so they've kind of converged in their own selfish ways. They both want government action. Any validity to any of that?
I think that politicians are among the people who are least respectful of the First Amendment.
Yes.
It's fascinating.
Yes.
It's really interesting how thin-skinned most politicians are about
Preach.
speech. It's fascinating to me, but how little they care about preserving, free speech rights. And so I just think we as citizens need to be on guard against that. And I think it's hard. Politics is very tribal right now. And so, there's a very strong temptation to say, well, hey, I'm a Democrat. So, whatever, Elizabeth Warren or Amy Klobuchar or Joe Biden are saying, like, I'm down with about social media. I'm down with that. Or I'm a Republican and whatever, Jim Jordan saying, I'm down with that. But I think I don't know. I worry about us. I worry about sort of that blind followership because you'd end up losing, frankly, the ability of platforms to be able to choose where they fit on that spectrum. And I think that's really important.
You and I don't have to spend much time talking about Elon Musk, but I'm just curious. I want your take in how Twitter or X, where you see them on this spectrum when it comes to these social media. How are they handling this issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways it's sort of shocking to me because the scenario I described earlier, if you're a social media platform, you can either be Parler or you can be Instagram.
Yeah.
You could be a niche service that allows most everything and not have a very successful business, just to be clear.
Yeah.
Not very many advertisers. Or you could be a broadly popular service like Instagram, billions of users, with a lot of advertisers and a reasonable amount of content moderation. Anybody looking at that would say, okay, it's pretty clear what the better business is here.
Yeah.
I'd rather be the owner of Instagram than Parler, right?
Yeah.
Or Truth Social. And I think the fact that, and so when Elon Musk acquired the company, you're like, wait a minute, it's pretty obvious here. And it just seems obvious, I think, in hindsight, that he cares much more about it being kind of a free speech plaything closer to closer to Truth Social or Parler, and this idea that they're doing anything to win back advertisers and make it a viable business is just absurd. So I just, in some ways, it'd be more honest of him to just say, look, this is my midlife crisis purchase.
Yeah.
And I don't really I don't care about advertisers, right? That would be the more honest approach.
So in I guess what you're saying is, in this world, if you are someone who has one of these platforms and you are going to let damn near anything go, all speech, and I would lean in this way, but you're making me concerned. That's not a great business model, is what you're saying.
No, it's a terrible business model. By the way, also because all these sites that get sort of say we're the free speech social network, inevitably get overwhelmed with the worst of the worst.
Completely.
Right? So,
completely.
I mean, and so it's interesting. So when I was at Google acquired YouTube in 2006, 2007. And the founders of YouTube had made a really interesting early decision to not allow adult pornography.
Yeah.
It's illegal, but they basically said, look, if you allow it, even though it's legal, you become a porn site. You just do. right? And so there's no world in which a video service coexists, has adult porn coexisting with, non-porn,
Right.
right? Those two things in the marketplace are separate things. And so I think it's sort of a similar dynamic that you could say, hey, Instagram can say, like, look, in order to get to 1 billion users and beyond, or Meta's doing this with Threads.
Yeah.
In order to build Threads into a bigger service, like, we're just a believer that we're not gonna take an anything goes approach.
Does that then, by definition, mean there's less? And hit me over the head because I'm probably wrong here. There's less free speech on Instagram and Threads, or is
Maybe.
that's not
Then
the
go to
right way to
Parler.
put it?
I mean, well, go to Parler, go to Truth Social. I just like the idea that people lack an outlet online. It's just contradicted by the wealth of options here. I think that you don't have a First Amendment right to say whatever you want to say on Threads
Exactly.
or Instagram.
Exactly. And again, give me your 30 seconds on if you had a crystal ball, what's the future of Twitter/X?
I think it continues to look more and more like Parler.
Okay.
I mean, I think that because I don't see they're not serious about any of these plans to really truly win back advertising, and so then if at some point that Musk gets bored with it and tries to sell it to somebody else at a loss, essentially. The funny thing to me about it, and I'm guilty of this as the next person, is that it's still the place where a lot of policymaker, political, journalistic chatter happens. So I'm still there.
Breaking news.
I'd much prefer to go somewhere else, but I'm there because everybody else is there, and so I think that for that reason it retains, and that's the reason why I haven't said, look, as mad as I am by Elon Musk, I haven't said I'm going to march off to some other network. Kind of depends on what everybody else does.
Adam? What's the deal with TikTok? Describe, explain, and help me figure out what we're going to do, what we should do, or just leave TikTok alone. What's going on?
Well, I think TikTok is a incredible success story. It's a great app that should not be owned by the Chinese if it wants to.
That's a great way to put it.
And so I don't think banning it makes any sense. But would we have allowed the Soviet Union to own CBS television?
Hell no.
No.
Yeah.
And so I think it's pretty clear. I don't worry as much about like the privacy bit that some people worry about as much as the propaganda control issue. And I admit some of this is theoretical future worry as opposed to based on stuff that I've seen them do. I just think it's a huge strategic mistake. The really interesting thing about this is that there is precedent for demanding and following through on a demand for the app to be sold to the U.S. So during the Trump administration, the app Grindr, the gay dating app, got purchased by a Chinese company. And it was reviewed by CFIUS, this Committee on Foreign Investment under Trump administration. And very quietly, Trump's CFIUS said to Grindr, no, we're not going to allow this. And they never made an announcement. This is a really interesting thing to me about it. They never actually put out a press release, but there were news reports, and the reports said what the U.S. government was concerned about was that Grindr there had a lot of data on sexual orientation of Americans, including prominent Americans, might be in the closet, their HIV status. Frankly, had a lot of blackmail material, right, on Americans, and they said no, you can't own it. So very quietly, they issued this divestiture demand to the Chinese owner of Grindr, and a year later, Grindr was sold to an American firm. And what I thought was interesting about it was all done very quietly, in a way, frankly, that allowed the Chinese and the Chinese government to kind of save face. I think that's an important element here. And so I think so that could definitely happen. But I think what's missing are two things. One, there needs to be somebody in the Biden administration who actually follows through on their divestiture demand, which they've already leveled at TikTok. And then secondly, there needs to be a way for this to happen sort of quietly. And I know that's hard. There's a lot of attention on TikTok because I just think face saving for the Chinese is an essential ingredient of the app actually being sold to an American company.
Because just logistically, and I loved your Grinder example, but logistically, TikTok is already owned by a Chinese company. How,
Yeah.
practically speaking, how do we grab it?
I think the administration has to say, look, you have a deadline.
Yeah.
We're giving you 6 months. Go find a buyer in the United States, and if you don't find a buyer by that date, you're banned. So the ban, I don't like the ban either.
Yeah.
But the ban is the leverage against, for a sale. And I think the hard part is they have to be willing to carry that out.
Oh God, yeah, Adam. They'd have to.
Yeah. And by the way, this is one of the challenges, is because I'm not aware of a previous CFIUS government review of one of these deals where there was even a question.
Yeah.
In almost all these cases, the Chinese are like, okay, fine, we're going to just work this out quietly. It has the advantage of being kind of separate from like U.S.-China bilateral relations. It's sort of seen as a kind of a little bit of its own plank. But the minute this became a massive, geopolitical advantage, here's the other thing about this. If TikTok were just some silly video app,
Yeah.
the Chinese government would not mind selling it because they wouldn't see it as that big of an asset.
Yeah.
The fact that they do resist selling
Yeah.
it sort of tells us everything we need to know about how strategically important they see it in the world.
And you and I know, politically speaking, I don't think the Biden administration will touch this in 24.
Not in 24. No, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, young people are on it.
I think there's too much concern about young people. Yeah, too much concern about young people.
And right now, even though I applaud Joe Biden for the record for being so damn pro-Israel, he's got a problem with some of his young voters on that issue. Adam, I hear from parents all the time about the shit and the crap and the bad stuff their kids are exposed to on social media. And maybe this is inherently addressed already, but what do you do about that?
Well, I think you give parents more tools, more control. I think recognition that a 12-year-old and a 13-year-old is really different from an 18-year-old.
Yeah.
And so I think you've seen a lot of the services over the last 3 years in particular undertake what they call age-appropriate design, kind of recognizing, okay, so for example, Instagram, when it says you're 13, when it knows that you're 13, you're new to the service, it has a lot. It doesn't recommend. I think there's no advertising. I have to go look at but it doesn't recommend as many things. It's a much more kind of confined experience, and all these are steps they've taken within the last couple of years. I don't think they necessarily get as much credit as they deserve for all of the tools. I think a lot of parents aren't aware of these tools or the controls that they have or the ways in which the services have been kind of designed. And I also think there's a little bit of a putting your head in the sand about the reality that early adolescence has always been pretty miserable.
Oh,
right?
God,
There's rivalries and cliques and gossip and relationships and all this stuff that kind of from middle school on through early high school, and it always kind of sucked. I'm not meaning to belittle it or anything. It's just always been there, and so a lot of that just moved to social media. But also, let's be honest that if you're the kid who maybe the lone gay kid at your high school, and you feel like there's nobody else for you to talk to, social media is a great way for a lot of people to connect with other people.
Exactly.
Right? And so I think some of that's missing. That nuance is missing.
That's a great, Adam. That's a great point. Hey, if I owned one of these platforms, and I love the way you've described the spectrum, the parlors over here and the Instagrams over here, the free speech, almost absolutist as I am, I would continue to push the envelope to allow as much speech. But you've opened my eyes.
Hopefully, you'd have a wealthy benefactor willing to basically fund this at a loss into perpetuity. Because honestly, I think that's what it requires.
Adam, that's a really interesting wrinkle in that I hear what you're saying is that it's almost impossible. It's almost impossible then to not become one of those things if you're the Wild West and you allow almost all. Correct?
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, but I'm not. I was kind of joking, but I was also kind of serious.
Yeah.
And like, the Mercers who helped fund Breitbart
Yeah.
are behind one of these services,
Yeah.
Truth Social or I think behind Parler.
Yeah.
And so I'm actually kind of serious that like that's just has to be the business model of them.
If you owned one of them, your business model would be probably lined up over here, more near the Instagram model.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think that's pretty clear. If you're looking at this just sanely, that's the better business.
And if you're looking at it as what's healthiest for the country, or does that even enter into this in your mind?
Oh well, man, that's a much bigger question. By the way, I have my leaf blowers here, so
It's all good, all good.
Okay, if you're looking at what's healthiest for the country, I think that's really hard. I mean, so I guess the way I would put it is that like I want a platform to be able to make its service as healthy and safe as it wants to be.
Yeah.
Right? I want it to have the ability to do that, and I'm comfortable with the coexistence of a lot of these services with different levels of moderation. I think that's healthy. That's a sort of a healthy form. I don't want to spend any time on Parler personally.
Yeah.
I don't want to go to 4chan, but the fact that it exists gives some outlet to those who do.
The last question I want to ask you is, and I'll ask you it from a very 36,000 foot realm. AI scares me only in that it's an unknown, but I think now, I mean, this issue you and I are talking about, content moderation, and everybody's on social media, and now you begin to throw AI into the mix. It scares a lot of people, Adam, the next, what awaits us. How do you respond to that?
Well, I think actually the content moderation debate that we've been having we're going to have it again and again with respect to generative AI. There will be, and you sort of see this, right? You see some people saying, well, we should adopt kind of a, everything needs to be safe and reviewed, right, before it's allowed. And, those are the people who might say there shouldn't be a Section 230 either when it comes to user-generated content. So I think you're always going to have this debate about kind of like the precautionary principle of should someone review something before it's kind of allowed out in the world, or the alternative principle of allowing the thing to flourish and seeing what problems emerge and then regulating to confine and respond to those problems. I think that kind of regulation where you say, okay, well, wait a minute, we think generative AI is a great tool, but do we want deep fake political ads? No, we don't. And so, Google, Meta, and Amazon and Microsoft can say, no, we're not going to allow that. So I just think, that's how it should work.
Yeah.
You should say, okay, well, I think generative AI is going to be amazing for creativity and all these other things, but there's going to be these certain cases and applications of it that we don't want to allow.
Respond to this, and then I promise you I'm done. I'm a libertarian, and I want to live in a world where we let everything blossom. But I got to be honest, Adam, I'm so afraid that we're living in a world right now where we no longer agree on basic truths, and I so worry about the absence of truth and then people acting out on untruths, January 6th and all the rest. That challenges my libertarian notion a little bit, because you can spread anything. Respond to that.
I share your concern. I do, and I think that a couple of years ago there was this sort of activism from the left, mostly against what's called filter bubbles.
Yeah.
This idea that you were only ever going to see the stuff you agreed with. It kind of quaint in retrospect, because arguably we're all very filter bubbled.
Oh, gotcha.
Now. How many of us are really exposed to contrary, opinion or facts or anything like that? But I don't know what the filter bubble response is. There's a risk that the antidote to filter bubbles is sort of like a national eat your vegetables mandate. I'm going to require every American to spend 30 minutes a week learning the facts about Ukraine.
Exactly.
From who?
From who?
PBS.
Thank you.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And so I really struggle with it too, because I share your concern. It really does bother me as well. but I just don't. I'm wary of kind of the counter
Completely.
progressive response to it, which makes me nervous.
Completely agree. That voice belongs to Adam Kovacevich. Follow him on Twitter at Adam Kovac at Adam Kovac. He's the CEO and founder of Chamber of Progress, a really great liberal, progressive, interesting technology industry think tank. They put out great stuff. Follow them. Go to their website. Follow them on Twitter at Progress Chamber. Adam, my friend, thank you. Keep doing what you're doing, and thank you for providing some information.
This was a lot of fun.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, share, and follow White Flag with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been White Flag with Joe Walsh.